Hey there, I'm Karl, and today I'm going to be painting up this company champion. I did this last weekend, it took me about 4 hours, and this guy is a custom chapter of the Gamma Dragons, which is what I've painted all my Marines as so far. Starting off on bare plastic, we're going to take him all the way to that turntable. So as a base coat, I'm just getting the Stynylrez Red Brown Primer all over him. Out of the airbrush, it's smooth. It sprays really smooth, so it's a perfectly good kind of primer color base coat hybrid. On top of that, I'm going from like a top angle down with Parasite Brown, very orange brown, so that I've used quite a bit as a base coat for orange. And it's a good transition color to Orange Fire, which really punches up that orange intensity from the top down and gives that really nice transition, as you can see in a few of the spots. Making a little bit of a mistake here with the orange, the Vallejo Model Air Orange. It's a little too orange, and I'm going to knock that back down with the Vallejo Game Color Orange Fire. And that's going to get me a final orange that I'm going to be pretty damn happy with. Moving on to the backpack, I'm painting it in a sub-assembly because painting it black this way is way easier than doing it by hand. And it's just a little bit of super glue that is just holding on there, so it's no problem. So Vallejo Model Color Black goes on as a base coat, then the German Grey kind of gets ghosted on top to kind of give it some more body. As you can see, it's really subtle, but it is there. And then the Vallejo Model Dark Grey is kind of being just kissed on top the top to give it like a highlight, and that's the backpack basically done. So here they are, the backpack and the marine contrasting together, and they really are quite poppy, which is why I like this paint scheme so much. And kind of forgot to hit the record button before I started brush painting, but mostly all you missed was me putting on that Vallejo black metal in that first coat into the shoulder pads. Those are going to be this kind of really dark, super dark gunmetal, which is going to get enhanced by washes eventually. And all I'm doing is I'm taking that same Vallejo Model Color Black that I was using earlier, and I'm just going for coverage over this entire mini. All the areas that are traditionally black for my chapters, so boots, knee pads, elbow pads, hands, usually most weapons are black as well. And then I'm coming over and touching up the shoulder pads with some of that Vallejo Model Air metallic black, which is itself it's a good paint, but it can be kind of tricky to go for coverage on such a bright undercoat like this orange. It would have been faster if I'd actually gone over it and painted them black and then painted the model color black on top of it. Would have saved me a little bit of time. I'll put that in my back pocket for lessons learned. And that's, the fun of painting miniatures. So moving on, I'm going to be whipping out the Scale 75 Black Metal, and this stuff is going to go into all the joints. Atypically, Space Marine joints are either some sort of black rubber or they're like metallic. I'm going for metallic because I already have a lot of black on the miniature. And if I put the black in the joints, it would feel like they would just be kind of like I forgot to paint the area. I primed them almost like I primed the entire thing black, and I forgot to paint the area rather than actually taking the time to put it in there. So those guys are getting the kind of gunmetal treatment. And Scale 75 is a nice black metal. It's got a nice coverage as a gunmetal goes. Next up is the Necro Gold. This is going to go on all the skulls, and I'm just going to go whip out, I believe I'm whipping out like a medium-sized brush for these guys. You're going to see me do a lot of brush flipping around because this is such a truncated video. It took me about 4 hours to paint this guy, and I'm obviously swapping between all my brushes. But they're all these bomb wick style real hair Kolinsky brushes. They're quite nice. So the skull, his shield, and the holy codpiece, they all got the gold metal treatment. And then I'm going to come back in with the black metal and do the metallic parts of the backpack here real quick. Just going over there and filling in some of the few things that I kind of missed. I'm going to, like, the backpack's kind of an afterthought, honestly, while I was painting this. So I'm kind of, you'll find me going back to it at random parts. So I've got the Vallejo Heavy Blue here, and I'm just going to try to put this on this codpiece drapery and kind of see how it looks. But this is a one-off model. I'm kind of making decisions as I'm going. I decide I don't really like the blue, even though it's a really strong contrast with orange. I decided instead to go with purple because it's very regal. It's kind of something that you expect somebody to be like a champion to have. He has this kind of gold and purple kind of thing, and it's gonna really, pop just more color contrast with that orange, which is going to be kind of nice. Coming in here with the heavy Sienna next. That's going to go on all the the pouches. It's atypically the base coat that I use for almost all my leather for my Space Marines. And then I kind of dry brush on Cork Brown to kind of punch it up. It's also going on the purity seals because it's going to make it a little bit easier later for me to go over it with Cork Brown as kind of a base coat, and then the bone for the purity seals, which is what I normally do for those. Next up is Dark Grey. You saw me on the backpack. It didn't really look like the Dark Grey had done much, but coming back here with the Dark Grey with the dry brush, you can really see how it pops that black. If you're painting Space Marines black, grab yourself a dark kind of slightly brighter gray, throw that on top with a dry brush, and it's going to make your stuff look worlds better. It's something that I didn't really do when I started painting my Space Marines. I kind of tried to do some airbrush shenanigans, but I found that a dry brush technique is simple and easy and straightforward, and it's really hard to screw up. So this is how I've kind of switched to doing my black for my Space Marines now. Just targeting areas. Just a word of warning with dry brushes, never mix your metallic dry brushes up with your non-metallic dry brushes, because little flecks of metallics will work its way into your paint, into your normal paint schemes. Next up is the Cork Brown. This is going to go on to basically any place that is going to be bone and will eventually get dry brushed onto the leather. Just coming in here and touching it into this kind of like, I don't know really what they're called, like name banners that they put on, the Space Marines put on the front of all their things. I might do a tutorial on how to actually paint names under this at some point, but I'm kind of trying to speed through this model right now and get the base coats done. And then I'm going to go back over with that as the purity seals, like I mentioned earlier, to base coat them. And then we're moving on to the Andrea blue. This is the color that I use for basically the eyes for all of my Space Marines, blue being a incredibly high contrast color and complementary color to orange. It's the obvious choice for an orange Space Marine for their eyes. And Andrea blue, really, you don't need to do too much. You just need to fill it in, kind of push back, do some cleanup there, what I'm doing with some various grays that I'm mixing together to make sure that it doesn't break up any kind of dry brushing in the face too much. And then I'm just going to go back over it with like ink later to kind of finish up the blues. Got a little bit of Parasite Brown. I need to do a little bit of a touch up here. Shadowed area, got a little bit of metallic black there, a little bit too much. Now, earlier I mentioned that this was an organic process, and because this is a one-off model, I don't really have an exact plan or strategy for how to approach it. I'm just kind of doing the art thing and just having fun with it. And what I did right there with the blue power sword was I was trying to do kind of like that, like impacting different levels of sheen that you kind of see some people do. And it didn't really pay out. So I just decided to cover it up, and I was going to just dry brush paint onto it. And it's at that kind of point where I thought of doing the lightning scheme you saw earlier. And then going back, what I've done here is just hit the purity seals of that heavy red, going back and doing some touch-ups with the scale 75 Black Metal. This is the same gunmetal that's in the joints, and just kind of going forward and picking out little bits and bobs that I think I missed. And now I'm kind of thinking about the colors that I want to do for the chest piece there, and I grabbed some Vallejo mech color metallic blue, and I mixed that with the 1-to-1 for the metallic black to kind of give me a dark metal, blue metal undercoat that's going to match the kind of laurels that are on my other Space Marines. You saw the Centurion over there that I've painted, and I'm just going to go and put that on there and get that coated in. Eventually I'll go over it with a highlight of the actual like straight up metallic blue to kind of give it a little bit more pop and punch. Do a little bit more coverage on the sword with that heavy blue, just to make sure it's an incredibly blue base coated sword. And then I come in with the heavy Sienna and touching that up on the kind of grip of the weapon, kind of get that nice leather. A little bit of Cork Brown on that skull. I usually paint my skulls gold, but in this case I went with the Cork Brown because it's going to be a bone hilted sword. And then I'm just dry brushing Cork Brown onto the leather, and that's going to be that for the back pouches pretty much until I hit them with a little bit of tone. Got some dark tone here. I'm doing a little bit of tone overlay. This is kind of a mix between a glaze and an actual like wash coat. I'm trying to really darken up that metal so I can come back later with the black metal and do some kind of scratch in, some kind of dry brushed highlights to really make those shoulder pads pop. I felt like they were a little bit too bright. That black metal is actually deceptively quite of a bright color. And while I wait for that glaze to dry, I'm just going to come in here and start working on the power sword. And this is going to be a very gradual dry brushing. And I'm constantly switching between dry brushes, so I'm not using the same dry brush. As brushes get loaded up, I'm going to rinse them out so they don't load up with paint and then kind of come back on. And this is straight Andrea blue. And I'm kind of working from the top down to kind of get a nice highlight on that top area. And then I'm coming in with some of this Pro Acryl titanium white, and we're just going to do a 2-to-1 ratio, or no, 1-to-1 ratio to kind of give this medium blue, take it from dark blue to medium blue to brighter blue, and then eventually we're going to come in with a 2-to-1 ratio and really punch it up. And we're just kind of dragging it down and having some fun with it and building up these colors very, very gradually. I've got a very little amount of paint on this brush here. You can see most of it's ended up on the palette as I mix it. Now we've got that 2-to-1 ratio, 2-to-1 in favor of white, and we're just kind of working on that super hot highlight on all the edges. And then I'm going to actually come in next, and I'm going to like solid up that highlight on the edge and paint it in. You can see I'm getting most of, when you're doing edge highlighting, you want to get most of your paint off and just kind of just with the side of your brush, kiss that paint in there. And I'm also doing a little bit of kind of trying to do a little bit of dry blending there. So now it's time for the lightning. I've got my finest detail brush, and I'm taking pure white, and I'm just going to kind of just, organically move down this miniature and paint in some lightning, making sure that my brush is not too loaded so I don't leave too big of an area. I'm trying to like ghost in this stuff because it's going to pop because it's white. It's not a big deal. And any areas where it's not popping is going to seem like you intended to paint it in a less intense area. So it's going to give kind of depth to the lightning as it goes down, depending on the pressure you apply and how loaded your paintbrush is. And I'm just kind of painting a little bits of squiggles here and there, and that's all it is. It's a super simple technique for power swords, and I think it looks kind of fantastic. I'm going to be doing a bunch more of this later. I'm super happy with it. So if anyone's curious about how to do this paint scheme, this is how you do it. And then I just come in there with a little bit of the Andrea blue mix someplace, headline around that. I'm going to just fix that up just a bit. And then I'm also going to do, I said you only have to use those two colors to do the eyes, but I had the brighter mix kicking around, so I layered a little bit into the eyes even though it wasn't all that much. Now I'm just going to finish up the crossguard for this sword here, and it's going to be done in gunmetal. I'll come back later once I'm doing kind of final edge highlighting and put a little bit of silver onto those edges, but overall just a little bit of gunmetal to finish it off. Nice mellow color, doesn't draw too much attention to the crossguard. And then a little bit of bone gets put onto all of the banners and purity seals on the miniature. It's a little thin right here as I put it down, but I'm going to mix it up a little bit better. And it's going to go on just a trick to all of the kind of skulls and purity seals and bones and areas and all those things on the mini. Next up, I'm going to be kind of doing some final touches to the drapery that this guy's got going on. I'm going to be just dry brushing on some Vallejo model color blue violet. It's just a lovely medium purple tone, and that's going to get kind of layered on there as heavily as I can. I do love dry brushing for layering colors like this. It's just so simple and easy. Unfortunately, the brush that I picked is a little too large for getting into the recesses and details for this area, so I grabbed a smaller one and loaded it up the same with the same color, and that's going to get us that nice, like really depth feel. Then I'm going to come back on with some bold white 2-to-1 ratio, so we're going to get a much brighter kind of almost pastel-esque purple going on, and that's going to be there for the highlights on the drapery. So while I was doing all that purple work on the kind of toga crotch cover, the bone white ended up drying and wasn't really as intense as I'd like it to be, so I kind of came back and give it a little bit of a touch up, and then I kind of went back onto the hilt now that it was dry, and I am going to dry brush on the Cork Brown just like I did with the satchels on his back. Now I'm going to whip out the Vallejo metallic blue, the Mecha blue again. It's just lovely coverage on this metallic blue. If you're looking for metallic blue, this stuff is great. And I'm just going to kind of come in and do another coat of that on the laurels. And I'm kind of just trying to pick it onto the raised areas and not go for like full deep crevice coverage, because I really don't want to kind of mess with that kind of darker area that's creating that sense of depth. A little bit of flat red. Flat red, if you don't have it, you should. It's a fantastic red. It's like a fire engine truck, super, like, you know, Tonka toy red. And that kind of just got picked onto the details on the purity seals to kind of pull them out. Now I'm coming back over the shoulder pads, which I went over earlier with the Army Painter Quickshade Black, Strong Tone, I believe it was, or Black Tone. And I kind of darkened down that metal. Now I'm trying to add some shine back to it with the gunmetal, the black metal, and I'm just kind of scratching in some highlights here with my paintbrush. This is almost a dry brush-esque kind of application, but I'm trying to do it very delicately and very controlled to kind of create areas of like very subtle highlight. And now this is a really good example of what I was just saying. Like, I'm just kind of coming in here and just delicately just like shading in these areas, getting as much paint off as I can, and then kind of pulling that paint downwards. And I'm using like a medium wetness paint here. It's not too wet, it's not too dry. Whereas with a dry brush, I would use a very dry paint, like an almost out of the pot paint. Rather with this, I'm kind of going over with kind of a medium wetness, which is going to let me go and do this kind of pseudo wet blending. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to also touch up the shield on his chest because it's the same thing. And I'm going to start doing the actual hot highlights on all of the metallics on him with the Vallejo model, Vallejo Air Metallic Steel. That's a mouthful. And that's just going to get you know, kind of edge highlighted onto all of the areas. Unfortunately, these Bonewhite brushes, these are great Klinsky brushes when I'm painting normally and I can load the entire brush up, but they don't hold up all that great for dry brush for edge highlighting, because with edge highlighting you don't tend to actually load the brush up with a very wet load. It's a very medium dry load. This Elven Gold is just a brighter gold. I'm kind of doing the same thing that I did with the shoulder pads. I'm kind of touching in highlights onto all the gold areas on the mini, kind of give it a little bit of a more depth and detail in all the gold areas. So one technique that I'll use while I'm painting miniatures is I'll actually take them out of my painting space, which is really brightly lit, and I'll put them on the tabletop to see how they play. And I kind of did this like right at this transition point, which is right here. So I'd taken it over to my tabletop and seen how the dark gray was playing with the dry brush and with the highlights on the miniature, and it really wasn't as poppy as I'd like. So I come back here with an even brighter gray, Stonewall Grey, and I kind of put that on top of the entire miniature. Lesson learned: when I'm dry brushing, I should probably go a little bit more intense with my colors, because tabletops are not as brightly lit as a painting space. You know, what looks good in your painting space is probably not going to have enough contrast to work on the tabletop, which is why heavy metal stuff, which is really heavily contrasted, works so well. And now I'm kind of just moving on to edge highlighting with just a 1-to-1 ratio of my kind of main orange fire, and that titanium white. Or sorry, it's a bold titanium white from Pro Acryl. And I'm just coming in and just scratching in edges here and there. And as you can see, I've kind of switched brushes here to like a much cheaper kind of low grade non-Klinsky style brush, because it kind of holds its shape a lot better when I'm doing my edge highlighting. And pro edge highlighting tip: don't load your brush all that much with paint. Try to keep that paint drier and take your time and work those edges up. But for my painting techniques and my style, I don't love a really super hard heavy metal style edge highlight. I like just to pick up the few details here or there that would pick up the most kind of brightness. And now I'm going to whip out the liquid skill, some Army Painter Quickshade, light tone and strong tone, 1-to-1 ratio with It's a 1-to-1 ratio of both the tones and then the matte medium, and this is going to kind of unify the overall finish of the miniature. If there's areas you want to be glossy, you can go back over it with a gloss coat, kind of a gloss medium at some point later, and kind of brush that in. And I'm just adding a little bit of water to get it flowing right, and this is really a feel kind of thing. And there's quite a bit of me washing this miniature in this video, just because I can't really describe how this should feel or how it should look. I can only show you how it should look. And I'm kind of alternating water and tone, and I'm going to go over and reach over and kind of remove tone from my brush, and anywhere I feel that it's too intense or there's too much tone that's coffee staining, or sorry, it's pooling in an area that's going to cause coffee staining, I'm going to go back over that area and I'm going to kind of pull that tone up. And this is going to just give the entire miniature, this is almost like a colored glaze rather than an actual like Agrix Earth Shade pure tone pass. And it gives the miniature like a really subtle depth to it. And it also kind of unifies all the colors in a way. And this tone combination works just great for orange. Orange likes its sepias, it likes its more brown washes instead of black. Whereas like a blue would not mind. If I was going to do like a blue marine, like an ultramarine or something, I would probably go over it with more of a blue and a black kind of tone. Speaking of the devil, I'm going to whip out the blue tone here. This is pure blue tone. I'm not mixing it with anything. And I'm just going to remove some of the tone that I put into the eyes here. It's pooled up a bit too much, and it's going to start obscuring it. That's the actual like main body tone. And I'm going to come back in here, like I mentioned earlier, and I'm just going to kind of touch tone into the corners of the eyes, and then on to the other area that needs blue tone, which is going to be the laurels on the shield. I had to do quite a bit of tone cleanup actually and sop up a bunch of tone on the laurels themselves because they were mixing a bit too much with the other tone, just like I did for the eyes. And then I watered down the tone for the sword 1-to-1 with some matte medium and some water, and I'm kind of scratching it in onto areas that I think could use a little bit more unification of color or feel like they're getting reflections from above. So the top of the hilt on the sword itself needed to be unified in color, and all the metallic areas that are facing the sky, I'm kind of going over and adding this blue tone that's going to give a little bit more color definition to that metal, and make it less just kind of blah, right? It's not going to just be I'm metallic, it's going to be I'm metallic, but I've got these little subtle blue highlights. And to finish up the tone work, I'm just going to take some 1-to-1 matte medium and purple tone and put that on the drapery there. And then I'm going to whip out the strong tone in just a minute and put that on all the leather. And that's just going to look just oh so nice. That leather, you know, with the subtle highlights and all that from the dry brushing and the tone work, super dead easy way to make leather, and I love it. I use it on all my Marines because it's just so simple. And moving on to the base here, I like to paint my Space Marine bases in this kind of like almost neutral brown kind of color scheme so that they don't really attract all that much attention. I want the main pop to be the Marine, not so much the base. So I'm going to dry brush it with Burnt Umber once it's dry. It takes a while to dry because I had to lay it on so thick as a base coat. But once it is dry, it's super dark brown, even though it kind of comes out chocolatey. On top of that, I'm going to dry brush on this kind of dollar store medium brown, dollar store like liquid style paint medium brown, and then I'm going to take that, mix it with the bold titanium, the unbleached titanium, not bold titanium, and that's going to kind of go on top of there to create a lot more definition within the mini. And then on the very tippy top, I'm going to do straight unbleached titanium, and that is going to define the base, and it's going to look pretty dang nice. If you're wondering what I use for the base, it's Sculpt-A-Mold. That's what it's called. It's dead simple to use. 5 minutes of experimentation, you'll basically figure out how I do my bases. And then a little bit of black around the rim, and it's good to go. Moving on to gluing the backpack on, sub-assembly style, I'm going to use gel super glue. And a trick for super glue, if you're worried about it frosting, is to put the entire thing underneath a fan. Because the frosting is caused by fumes that are fuming off the super glue. So you use a very little bit amount of super glue, which is why I'm applying it the way that I am. Putting it on a palette and then kind of brushing it on with an applicator. And then I'm taking that and I'm actually running it underneath the same hairdryer that I used to basically speed up my mini process overall. And there, that guy is on there perfectly dry, and I got 0 fumes. So there's the pro tip for today. And just to finish the miniature off, I'm going to hit with some sand and varnish. That's just going to kind of unify the finish of the actual paint. You know, get it all satiny instead of matte or gloss. And Bob's your uncle, we are done. So overall, I'm super happy with how this project turned out. It was actually kind of goes a little bit beyond just painting this guy, because I had to build an entire camera, like kind of arm out of scrap wood and some 3D printed parts in order to film with my DSLR at the angle that I did. But all that stuff is already built and it's all set up and I've got everything working. So I'm going to be making a bunch more painting videos going forward. I'm going to be finish up the rest of my Centurion squad. You saw one of the Centurions make a guest appearance in this video. Those guys are probably going to be the next video up that I make. And then we might go into some AdMech. If you have any comments on the video or something you'd like to see or technique you'd like me to expound on, let me know in those comments. And if you do subscribe, keep an eye out in your subscription feed for my videos in the future, because they're going to be coming a lot faster than they have in the past. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.